Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at the New Deal, a series of programs that was meant to fix all the problems from the Great Depression. So let's get started. The centerpiece of the New Deal is the man who would ultimately become president and institute it, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Roosevelt had a long history of being a civil servant, an active politician. He had been Undersecretary of the Navy during the First World War. Afterwards, though, he contracts polio, and this left him crippled. He would eventually regain a lot of functionality over most of the rest of his body. However, his physicality would never be what it once was. Didn't matter though, his mind was still as sharp as ever, his brain was still where it needed to be, and he believed he could still serve the people. When he ran for office for the election in 32, he did everything in his power to conceal to people that he had polio. Public appearances would be like from a car or a train or a desk or out a window, the kind of thing where, no one is wondering, why is that man not walking around a whole heck of a bunch? The idea is very simple. You wanted to perceive your leader as healthy and vigorous. And if that wasn't the case, the chance of getting elected is really small. At the Democratic Convention, Roosevelt outlines his plan to fix the nation, to end the Depression as the New Deal. Problematically is he doesn't really specify what it is, how it's going to work, just that it's a plan. Now, whenever we see a presidential election, especially in times of economic or social upheaval, the incumbent party is always, always, always on the losing end of it. It's usually very difficult for them to garner votes, whether it's for the big office or legislative or whatever. And that absolutely happens in 1932. You can see on the maps in front of you that from 28 to 32, the Republican versus Democratic states are, well, it's a wash. It really is for the Republicans. In fact, the biggest thing that's really differentiating the two isn't how are we going to deal with the Depression, but what are we going to do about prohibition? Republicans wanted to keep it. The Democrats said it's time for it to go. And in 33, the changes actually begin before Roosevelt is even in office, after he'd been elected, but before he had been made president. The states start outlining the idea of bank holidays, the idea that the bank isn't open for a large amount of business during these bank holidays. Now, what this means is, number one, no money is moving around at all, which might keep banks alive a little longer. And it had the double benefit of, if you were trying to pay off some cash or pay off a loan or debt or anything like that, it might give you an extra couple of days to square away your funds. Finally, if the bank isn't open, you don't have to pay your employees. And if these are federal banks, for example, that's paid out of the federal budget. So yeah, those people aren't working that day. They have the day off. They're not earning anything, but it's also saving money in the longer run. In January, the 20th Amendment is going to be passed, and that is going to move up when the presidential inauguration happens to what it is now. And it'll also say how frequently Congress gets to meet. And a month after that, Congress passes another constitutional amendment that ends prohibition. That's the 21st Amendment. Now, the 18th Amendment established prohibition, but because it's a constitutional amendment, you need another constitutional amendment to get rid of it. Prohibition had largely failed. It had brought in organized crime. It had made common people criminals. And to keep people from drinking certain alcohol agents, poison had been added to them by the federal government. And the thought process was, well, no one's going to want to drink so badly that they're going to poison themselves. And that concept was proven very, very wrong. When you look at the New Deal under Roosevelt, it was really meant to be the alternative between two different approaches. You've got, if it goes too far left, then we've got a society that is extreme socialism. If it goes too far right, we have a society that's indicative of fascist Nazism. You needed to use something that's going to be a little bit of both. And that's really kind of hard. What FDR did is something we had seen the progressives do at the dawn of the 20th century. They relied on people who knew the problems to fix the problems. Intellectuals, college professors, social workers. These are the folks who are going to hold key positions within the administration and kind of guide these programs as they're needed to. March 4th, FDR is sworn in, and he gives this very impassioned speech, the "we have nothing to fear but fear itself" speech. He rallies people behind him, and he's really good at getting people motivated that, yeah, it's bad right now. It's really bad right now, but it's going to get better. You just got to trust it's going to get better. Less than a week later, he summons a special session that's going to start putting forth his plans, and largely it's the 100-day plan. Within the first 100 days of being in office, he wanted to see passed the following 5 programs: the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the National Industrial Recovery Act, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now, any one of these things is more than enough for an administration to tackle in, golly, almost a year. But the fact that we're pushing 5 of these out all at the same time is really ambitious, and it's all going to happen in the next couple of months. Now, if you're familiar with these plans, you know about how big a deal this is. If you're not familiar with these plans, keep listening. We're going to get there in just a jiffy. Now, Roosevelt knew he was going to have to give some people some bad news. Like, almost immediately, the federal employees, all of them receive a pay cut, about 15%. Now, no one likes to get their pay cut, but he also cuts veteran benefits too. So you've got a lot of people who are really upset. 2 days after being sworn in, he passes a nationwide series of bank holidays, just like the federal government had done to the states, now just coast to coast. And no more can people export gold out of the United States. This was meant to better control the cost of the dollar and the cost of wealth. Now, this was the kind of news that's going to get a lot of people upset. And he delivers this news to people through these radio shows called fireside chats. The purpose of the chats was not to hear from your president, not to hear the political theory and the economic philosophy of what's going to happen. No. It's meant to be, hey, friend, times are hard. We've got to cut salary to save money. And if we don't cut salary for folks, we're going to have to start firing folks. Oh, that's not good. No one wants to lose their job. Come on, friends, let's all band together and we can do this together. It's not going to be forever. And people think, okay, that makes sense. Confidence is slowly being built back up through the banks who, lots of them had closed. People who had taken their life savings out of their bank start putting it back in the next week. And the next thing that he does is to the banks themselves. Congress passes the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in order to secure bank deposits. Now, what this means is if you go to your bank and you deposit money and that bank goes bankrupt or is robbed or something happens to the cash within the bank, the money itself is insured. So your money didn't go anywhere. This is really good because, well, you trust your bank knowing that no matter what, your cash is safe. The Securities Exchange Commission is also going to be established. This is going to make sure that none of those stock market fishiness, which happened in the 20s, happens again. We also see that the Homeowners Loan Corporation is going to be established, which is going to better provide money to people who need it for a mortgage to get it the first time, or to make sure that your home isn't foreclosed on. This was meant to give more trust to these institutions, and it worked. It worked really well. The Congress also passes the $500 million Recovery Act for needy people under the National Recovery Act. And this is that's a lot of money back then, especially during a depression. Like with the idea of inflation, this is a single stimulus package worth dozens of billions of dollars now. We also see it's going to create the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they're responsible for getting jobs to young men, mostly 18 to 25, to do, well, agricultural conservation work. Maybe it means planting trees in a park. Maybe it means planting flowers by City Hall. Maybe it means building dams. Maybe it means jetties and dikes and that kind of stuff. The kind of thing that you just need the willpower and a lot of people to do it. And you got it. It's a job that can pay you tomorrow and has lasting impacts for however long that thing is around. The National Industrial Recovery Act is our last little bit under this one, and it allows some monopolistic practices, which had really been unpopular during the progressive age. But at this point, the idea is also going to give unions more power to do what they want to do. So this is giving to both big corporations as well as union powers. The catch is that if you're working under the union, you're going to guarantee a protected minimum wage and a maximum amount of hours you can work. So these are the things that unions had been wanting forever. We do see that there are a couple new union organizations start showing up. The Committee on Industrial Organizers comes into existence in 1935, and they're going to join up with the American Federation of Labor, creating a very large union entity that's going to cover both your skilled and unskilled laborers. We see a series of strikes are going to start to happen because, well, now the unions have more power to do more things. Some of these strikes are not popular among people because the populace looks at these people striking as they're danger to the system. They're a danger to what's going on. They got to be stopped. We got to have jobs moving. But they wanted the same things they had always been wanting, and now they have the power to really do something. The Agricultural Administration Act was designed to help the farmer. If you were a farmer and you had suffered horribly under the Depression, under the Dust Bowl, you might find yourself losing everything and barely scraping by. What this program did was it set a amount that everything would cost. And the way this worked was all farmers are going to receive certain subsidies from the federal government. However, they cannot produce more than X amount of the good. So if you're growing one of those staple crops, wheat, cotton, tobacco, pork, for example, you are not allowed to grow more than X. And if all farmers are doing this, this is going to better regulate the cost of that staple crop. If you produced more than you were told to, then you wouldn't get any stimulus money at all. So there's some farmers who end up having to destroy part of their crops in order to get these government subsidies, or they were sold on the black market, which was definitely problematic and not very popular. And it really hurt more the sharecroppers than it did anyone else. If you relied on a lot of land, if you relied on a lot of machinery, then your chance of being successful under the AAA is really pretty small. The last program that we're going to look at today is the Tennessee Valley Authority. And this entity was responsible for creating dams, power plants, hydroelectricity generators to power the Tennessee Valley, to get fertilizer to these folks, to make flood control and conservation a thing that would ultimately go on to power, well, everything in this area. And we're talking about the lives of millions of folks are going to be transformed because electricity will be arriving. And this might be a thing that you'd think, yeah, that's like late 19th century problem. No, folks, it's the 1930s and we still got this as a thing. So today we talked about some of the origins of the New Deal, some of the impacts of these new problems and programs, and what we see happen next. Hope you learned something today, and I'll see you next time.